So I want to keep this really short because you got some great content today, but I want to give a shout out to Dave. I mean, if you don't, one of the things when we kind of talk, we'll talk a little later about how the genesis of how this started, but when the idea of having Dave being involved was very important because in the early days of cloud, Dave was basically driving Cloud Camp, and a lot of the success of cloud and what we've seen over the last 5-6 years, Dave drove a lot of that messaging early, a lot of the early startups. So I'm hoping like Dave gives us that same mojo here for this event. So, so cool. A couple of things too. The sponsors, we'll kind of talk about them throughout the day. We basically, and I'm not pulling out my violin, but we kind of just went under the numbers here. So if you want to see this event again, me and Dave are basically going to take a little money of our pocket to do that. Don't cry for us. But the point is, if you want to see this event again, make sure you let these sponsors know that you appreciate. If you think this event stinks, then forget it. But if you really enjoy this event, honestly, let the sponsors know so that we can keep this thing going. One other thing I want to talk about too is 5 years ago in Ghent, I attended the first DevOps days. I was basically the only American there, right? Patrick DeBar. And there was only about 60 people in that event. I think we just broke 100, or just walked in. So I'm pretty excited to see where this can go in the same vein of what, if you've been following what DevOps is doing. A couple of things I want to talk about before we get started a little bit. You know, my name is John Willis. Botchgaloop is my Twitter handle. If you want to contact me, that's the best way to get a hold of me is that. One other thing I do want to, oops, wrong way here. One other thing I want to talk about is the hashtag. So again, letting that know, I stole the DevOps Days Code of Conduct. I'm not trying to act like it's not important. I think you should look at it sometime today. This is a small crowd. We'll seek you out and destroy you if you disobey. But the point is, if you feel like you're being harassed or you're feeling, please come to me and Dave and let us know. And if you misbehave, we will ask you to leave, right? But if you want to take a look at the Code of Conduct, I think it's important to make sure that we respect everybody's opinion, especially when we get to open spaces and all that. So I want to just talk about a couple of things before I bring up our first speaker. You know, myself, I think there's like some disruptors here, right? So why DevOps for networking? In fact, some of my DevOps friends are like, why didn't you just create as part of DevOps? And you know, the first things first, I think it was important to get a lot of network people to come. I wanted to be lopsided on network with the DevOps people coming in and saying, what the heck's going on there? DevOps days were very lopsided on what I'll just call compute, classic compute. How many people consider themselves just network engineers, network architects? How many people would say they don't really mess with networks much? They're mostly, you know, involved with, you know, like a sysop or a classic DevOps. Uh-oh, you're in trouble. You're the only one. They're going to be ganging up on you. We got two. All right, good. Yeah, these guys are going to be... All right, there we go. All right, so anyway, no, hopefully we'll get, I think there's, obviously it's not, there's a lot of spread on both sides of what people do, so I think we'll have some good things. You know, the journey here is, you know, I spent 10 years pretty much preaching this kind of story of DevOps. 8 years ago, I ran into Luke Canese, Puppet Labs. He was given a presentation. Somebody told me he was a president. For those of you who don't know, Luke Canese, the founder of Puppet Labs, somebody said, hey, this guy's giving a presentation on monitoring. I'm like, monitoring, let's go. We get there, and it has nothing to do with monitoring, it's configuration management. But he kind of changed my life because for the prior 10 years, I've been doing Tivoli and large mainframe, what I call first-generation configuration management stuff. And I realized everything I've been doing for 15 years was dead wrong. And I got to meet Adam Jacob over at Opscode, now called Chef, and went to work with those guys, and really spent a lot of years evangelizing, mostly in kind of the sysadmin operations, what I would just generally call compute, this message of kind of changing the way we do things. You know, and some of those messaging come around like being more software development driven, acting more like software engineers in some form, all these things that start happening, thinking about how we do things in terms of infrastructure, instead of going in and changing the config, maybe building abstractions, maybe even a language that does that, right? So, anyway, I think the important reasons of why we're here today, I think there's three major disruptors. Our first speaker is going to basically, I think, be our best source for an explanation of what I think the first one, the disaggregation of network devices. Like many, you know, 15 years ago, right, we got a box for the AIX, with the software and hardware. We got a box from HP with the hardware and software. And I joke overnight, I woke up and I just got Linux and basically had to find your own box, right? So I think, we're seeing that happening in the network space with network devices. You can get the software in some cases. So I think a lot of that will be a discussion today. I think that's part of what's woken up the DevOps community. Like, it is Linux. And I can do all those things I can do with a server. I think software-defined networking is a big part of this. Why are we, what's driving this discussion to say there's DevOps and network need to start having the same conversation. And then in the end, it's really about taking the infusion of DevOps things that have happened. Jeremy, my good friend over here, is always saying that, there's a lot of us who've seen a 10-year movie of what's happened, and we want to take those lessons learned and hopefully help the network people to try to figure out and forge what DevOps for networking might look like. In the end, it's just DevOps, but anyway, I'm about done here. Again, make sure you make a shout out to our sponsors here. The reason we're having food, the reason we were able to use this beautiful place is because of these sponsors. All right, so my first guest speaker is J.R. Rivers from Willis. A year ago, I did my first presentation on DevOps and networking as a keynote, and I happened to be writing my presentation before I was going up, and the booth next to me was Cumulus. And the guy next to me said, "Hey, what are you working on?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing this networking DevOps. Have you heard about what we're doing?" I'm like, "No." And in 5 minutes, he told me I had to add 3 slides to my deck because it was so disruptive what was going on here. So give a big shout out for J.R. Rivers from Cumulus Networks.